Okay, welcome to this CRA-Education Committee webinar, the PhD in CS, Getting There and Being Successful. Our main audience is undergraduate students who think they might be interested in pursuing a PhD in computer science, but I hope we also have some faculty as well who are interested in how to advise their students. I will let my colleagues introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ian Ludden. I'm a PhD student in the computer science department at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign.
Hi, everybody. My name is Michael Hilton. I am an associate teaching professor at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
And I'm Janet Davis. I'm an associate professor of computer science at Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington. And we are all members of the Education Committee of the Computing Research Association. Let's go ahead and begin. There we go. All right, so if you're here, you're probably at least thinking about a PhD in computer science. So why should you consider a PhD? And here are all the reasons why I didn't know when I applied to graduate school as an undergraduate. I applied to to earn a PhD in computer science because I loved school and I wanted to stay in school. And it turns out that's a very bad reason to pursue a PhD. Three better reasons to pursue a PhD are, first of all, to learn how to do research, not just to study advanced topics, but to learn how to ask and answer questions that nobody has asked before. A PhD is really an apprenticeship in doing research. When you earn your PhD, that's a license to do research without supervision. Another reason to pursue a PhD is to advance the state of the art. The whole point of research is to create new knowledge and share that new knowledge with other people in the field. So you can learn about and contribute to cutting edge computer science research. And then finally, the PhD can be an opportunity to pursue your own deep professional and intellectual interests in computer science. Much more specialized than what you'll study in your undergraduate curriculum. More great reasons to pursue a PhD. Pursuing a PhD provides you with a unique opportunity to teach and mentor. The job that I'm doing now is not only research, my big focus is on teaching, but I could not be a college professor if I did not have a PhD. Satisfy your intellectual curiosity, discover new things, identify new problems, develop creative solutions, push the boundary of knowledge, and research is all about lifelong learning. Most people don't realize that CS PhD programs pay comfortable stipends, so you'll have money to live on while you're in a PhD program. But note there are opportunity costs. You're not probably going to get rich with a PhD in computer science. It may not increase your earning potential. There are opportunity costs in terms of you're not spending those years while you're in your PhD program. You're not out there in industry earning a software engineer's salary. So you can get paid to learn, but money is not really the motivation for earning a PhD. In a nutshell, the timeline for a PhD is pretty variable. Averages about 6 or 7 degrees starting from a bachelor's degree. Depending on where you go, if you start with a master's degree, that might shorten your timeline. There is coursework as part of a PhD. It's not just going to school, but there is some going to school. Typically, you would take some more advanced foundational courses in areas like algorithms, theory of computation, operating systems, and also take some more specialized or advanced electives in areas like machine learning or distributed systems, for example. The biggest part of a PhD is doing research. Your goal at the end is to write a dissertation or a doctoral thesis, which is a monograph that you write explaining your research problem and how you've addressed that research problem. Along the way, you'll usually have an oral or written exam, for example, a qualifying exam or a general exam. And you'll also defend your dissertation in an oral presentation at the end of the PhD process. As noted before, you get paid to learn. Typically, tuition is waived, and you'll get both a stipend, which is a kind of a living wage, and a health insurance from either a teaching or a research assistantship or possibly a fellowship. Career paths beyond this, you could go on to academia and become a professor, and there are variations on that career path. You could go work in industry, a nonprofit organization, or as a government researcher or engineer. Having a PhD can position you well to be an entrepreneur with a high-tech startup, and a PhD can also help get you into higher level development or leadership positions where there may be elements of research in that work, solving previously unsolved problems. A typical timeline for a PhD program. In the first year, you'll do the foundational coursework to prepare for research, and hopefully you'll join a research lab with your advisor and an initial research project. By the end of year 2, you'll have finished most of your coursework. Often you'll take a qualifying exam, identify a research area, and you may earn a master's degree along the way as part of the qualification process to become a PhD candidate. In year 3, you'll begin to obtain preliminary results and publish papers, formulate your plan, form a committee of faculty who will assess your research, and begin writing a research proposal. Typically in year 4, you'll complete and defend your research proposal, continue doing research and publishing your results, and ideally identify your future career path, although you may not make up your mind until you're applying for jobs during your last year. Beyond that, you'll continue to publish. In year N, you'll write and defend your dissertation, and you'll prepare an interview for your next job. We often get asked how a PhD differs from a master's degree. As I said before, a PhD is really a license to do research. A master's degree a PhD can be similar to a master's degree in the first 2 years, specifically an academic master's degree. An academic master's degrees emphasizes coursework much more. You'll take 3 or 4 courses a term in the first year, and then maybe in the second year, take 1 or 2 courses a term with a master's thesis. Whereas PhD programs are usually funded, often through additional duties as a teaching assistant or a research assistant, academic master's programs are not always funded. A professional master's program is geared more towards industry careers. You might take 3 or 4 courses per term for 1.5 or 2 years, or you might take 1 course a term in the evening over several years if you're completing a master's degree while working full-time. Professional master's programs are typically not funded by the school, but it could be funded by the company that you work for. Many larger companies will pay for their employees to earn a professional master's degree. And so where we go from here, I'll turn it over to Michael to talk about preparing a strong application and the admissions process. And then he'll turn it over to Ian to talk about the first few years. And I'll wrap up briefly talking about the research apprenticeship and beyond the PhD. And if you have questions at any time, you can ask them in the Q&A. So now I'll turn it over to Michael.
Thank you, Janet. That sounds like a great plan. There is a question that I'm going to address in a few slides, but I'm going to ask you to just hold on for just a minute, and then I'll address it when we get to a slide that is going to be perfect for that question. I just want to start out by acknowledging that the PhD programs are very different and people are very different. And this advice for preparing a strong application varies wildly by person and program. And so these are, like the Pirates of the Caribbean would say, these are general guidelines, not strict laws about how to apply for PhD programs. So, if you're currently still an undergrad, there are some things you can do to prepare during your undergrad years to participate in a PhD, right? So choose courses carefully. Generally, courses aren't the most important thing when getting into a PhD, but courses can be very important to you because you're going to sign up for 5 to 6 years of your life for something. You should make sure that this is something you like before signing up. Like, you can change later on, but it gets a lot harder to change the farther you go on. So if you think you want to do a PhD in ML or graphics or software engineering or databases, it's really good to have at least some experience with the field and make sure that this is something you generally feel like you care about and are passionate about. I think, excelling in your classes is great. Grades are not the most important thing, but mastery of the material is pretty important because if you don't have a strong foundation, this is going to make, research, which is a very in-depth process, much trickier. Getting involved in research is by far the most important thing you can do during your undergrad years. Again, this is mostly for your own benefit so that that research is very, very different than going to class and participating in undergraduate classes, like Janet said. And I think, just not wanting to go into the real world is not necessarily a great reason to get a PhD, right? Research is a whole different ball game. It's going to be a lot of failure, but also a lot of great rewards. And so getting involved in research and kind of having an understanding of what research is like, that there's a lot of ability for there to be creativity, but also there is not a lot of constraints and you kind of have to find the constraints yourself. This can be a real challenge. Some people love this, some people don't love this. So having had some experience and knowing that you like research before you get started can be super helpful and a great advantage. Your professors are your best gateway into research. To get admitted, you're going to need absolutely at least one letter of recommendation. The more, the better. We'll talk about letters of recommendation in a minute. They also most likely have a PhD and they have been through this process before. And everyone likes, everyone, there is a self-selection bias in terms of getting PhDs, but this means that the people who have them are biased towards thinking they're good. So they're biased towards giving you advice on how to get one because they think they're a great thing, right? What are graduate schools looking for in applicants, right? Well, prior research experience is great. Again, it's not necessarily, you don't have to have published a certain number of papers. You don't have to have presented at some great conference or been in some top journal, but just some view into the fact that you actually know a little bit about what research is like and that you actually like that. And that's actually what you want. It can be really helpful. Potential, this is kind of a squishy topic, obviously. But I think the easiest way to show potential for being a leader in the field is showing that you have had success previously. So showing success, showing leadership in the past is a great thing. Evidence of creativity, effort, performance, persistence. Like I said, research, you can often fail many times before you succeed. Persistence is a very important quality. And creativity, you're not answering questions that people already know the answer to. You have to be creative into how you're going to find solutions to that. And just, your academic performance. If you, again, grades aren't everything, but if you've shown that you've thrived in an academic environment, then this might be a situation where you might be a great candidate for a PhD. So there are 4 major components to the application. And we'll talk about one that, the jury is kind of a caveat, but I'll get there in a second. So you're going to have to write a personal statement. So this is where you talk about some idea of something that you would like to do in research. You present some sort of a problem. I have a whole slide coming up on that, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. I'll leave that for the next slide. Your undergraduate transcripts are part of your package. A lot of times, again, don't get super discouraged if you don't have straight A's. But a lot of times, this gives a good sense into does someone have a high breadth of background? What is their preparation like? And I don't think the best preparation is necessarily exclusively computer science classes. Lots of times, having had a few classes in other topics and a breadth, a lot of people who come, I've noticed that specifically students that come from liberal art colleges tend to have more breadth than students who come from schools like CMU, which has a huge CS program, but is often sometimes the students can be very, very narrow. Both have their strengths, both have their weaknesses. There's not a right or wrong answer here. Letters of recommendation are really, really important. One professor saying, hey, this person did research with me and showed that they are great at doing research can really go a really long way into you getting accepted or not into a PhD program. I would say that a letter of recommendation can strongly overcome some relatively lackluster grades. If you're on academic probation your whole entire career, this might be a problem. But if you're a straight B student or a BC student and with a really strong letter of recommendation that you were persistent and creative and you did research and you excelled at it, that is going to go much farther than a 4.0 GPA. There is the GRE. I should have looked this up. I don't even remember what the E stands for in GRE. I think it's graduate something exam. This is a test that you can take. It's kind of like the LSATs to get into law school, if you're familiar with that, or maybe even think about the SATs to get into college. It's a standardized test that is not computer science specific anymore. There used to be a computer science specific version. Many schools are moving away from that, especially during the pandemic. So there's some big question marks about whether schools might even be accepting the GRE or not. So that's, but there's been a lot of movement around this during the pandemic. So your mileage may vary. You should probably check into that before you start applying. Let's go back to personal statements for a second. I said we would come back to it. So there's some links here. With these slides will be available afterwards. You'll be able to go to these links and see them. This is obviously a key part of graduate school admissions at every graduate school. So lots of places have advice on this. If you talk to your professors, they probably have advice to give to you on this specific topic as well. The biggest, most important bullet here is demonstrate that you have ideas for interesting and important problems to study. This is absolutely the most important thing here. Describing your prior research experience, describing your future research interests. These are great kind of building blocks or context on which you can describe your ideas for interesting and important problems to study. You don't have to study the thing that you describe in your research statement. You may end up with a professor who has different interests. You may have lots of interests and you might only describe one in your statement, but you may have other interests, which may be the interests you end up pursuing. This is not a contract that you absolutely have to study this topic, but this just shows that you can come up with some interesting ideas, think about a problem deeply, right? These are important characteristics to show off in a good personal statement, right? A bad personal statement is just a statement of facts, right? I was 5 years old and my dad taught me to program. And then I went to this class and I took this AP class. And then I took these classes as undergrads, right? That's all maybe true, but that's not a good personal statement, right? Thinking about a problem deeply, thinking about solutions is much better. Make it personal or unique to you, right? There is not a canonical, right personal statement and a wrong personal statement, right? A personal statement that feels authentic, that feels like like I'm learning something about the actual person that wrote it, is a much stronger personal statement than one that conforms to some generic ideas of what a student should be like. It's a great idea to personalize it to the department. I would maybe go even a step further and say, especially if there is a specific professor whose work is interesting to you, it's a great place to mention that. Oftentimes, really, when you get admitted to a PhD program, you're often getting admitted because a specific professor thinks that you would be great to work with. And so name dropping that specific professor's work in your statement can help make sure that they see your statement and engage with it. Getting a current faculty member to give you feedback, even this is a faculty member at your institution, is a great way to get some advice on how to go about doing that. I see there's some some questions going on in the chat. That's all great. I'm not stopping to answer the ones that are getting answered, but yeah. This one I will talk about there is a question I do want to talk about a little bit when it comes to this one. And this is thoughts on going into industry and then returning to a PhD at a later point in life. So this is actually my story. I graduated from San Diego State University. I worked for 10 years for the Department of Defense for the United States government. And then I came back to school, got a master's, a PhD, and now I teach here at Carnegie Mellon. So again, people are very different from each other, and there's a broad range of people in the world. There's a broad range of programs. So this is some general advice, but if you are kind of not a little bit outside the norm of maybe the standard experience, then your letters of recommendation might look fairly different. So so you'll see here that we say that, traditionally academic letters are stronger than industrial letters. This is generally true because generally a PhD is about research, and research is more about kind of happens generally more in academic context than industrial context, where it's often more about software engineering and just building things. I did have a letter of recommendation from my job supervisor that pointed out that I had built a system that then President Barack Obama had said that's pretty cool. So, if you have something like that, you definitely want to include that, right? That made me special in ways that other people weren't. And so I made sure to include that. I just lost the slides on my screen. Is this just me, or is everyone experiencing a visibility issue with the slides?
I'm also seeing a big gray box.
Okay. I will keep talking while Ian looks at this. So my letters of recommendation look very different than someone who maybe has, but I also had been out of college for 10 years. So I didn't have close relationships with my professors from, a decade ago when I was applying to grad school, right? If you are a current student and you're thinking of applying this year and you have a professor that you're doing research with, right? Your letters of recommendation look very different than mine, right? And that's totally okay. There's not one correct way to come up with your letters of recommendation.
Sorry, my Zoom client seems to be struggling. I'm trying to refresh the share, but.
Would you like me to take over sharing?
Yeah, that's probably best if you can.
Okay, give me 1 second. I need to stop using remote control, and then I will. So I will say, as I'm doing this, I will say in general, often once you start getting paid to do work and your life is settled, it can be a little bit tricky to go back to grad school, right? I started grad school and I had to go from getting paid as an engineer to having to pay a significant amount of money. So for a master's, right? So, there are challenges there. Can everyone see the screen again? Is that visible to people? Ian, are you seeing my screen now?
I'm not seeing your screen now.
Okay, Janet, are you seeing my screen? Excellent.
I am
Thank
seeing
you.
your screen, yes.
Sorry for the confusion. So I will say typically 3 or 4 letters are required, but really 1 or 2 strong letters is good enough. So if you don't have 4 professors that you have a relationship with who can write you a letter, that is totally fine. You do not need 4 professors to write you letters to get into grad school. 1 really strong letter, another couple letters from people who know you and can write a letter are generally good. At least 1 strong letter is important. A letter that says, my student did well in this class is not a very strong letter. It's okay for the professors to be in a different discipline, especially if they're addressing your research potential. If you've done a research project in biology, even though the discipline is different, some of those skills can easily translate into CS research. Internship supervisors are good, but are generally probably not going to be as strong as someone who knows about research or is in a research area. The one exception is if you're doing a research internship, then you can get a very strong letter from an internship supervisor. So, you want to make sure that people writing you letters feel comfortable writing your letters, right? That you don't want them to write a letter that is not a positive letter, or a letter that says, I don't really know this person that well, right? That can come across as not a positive experience. So one good thing to do is to, have built a relationship before. This shouldn't be the first time they've ever met you when you ask them to write a letter, and, give them a way out to say no. I personally get asked to write letters as a professor. And if it's a student I know well, they've been like a TA, or maybe I've worked with them extra, or maybe they've been in multiple of my classes, then it's usually fairly easy for me to write a letter. If it's, 1 student out of a class of 120 and I don't really know them that well, I will often reply, well, I could write you a letter, but the letter is only going to say, this student took my class and they did okay in it, right? Or they did well in it, right? That's, that can be, and I give them a chance. But, think about that when you're thinking about who can write your letters. A letter from someone who's less prestigious, they don't have to have a professor in front of their name, but if they have a relationship with you and they can describe you and explain why you're creative and persistent, this can be much more important for letter readers than just that they have some big fancy title. Oftentimes these, materials like a resume and transcript can help refresh professors' memories, because sometimes we are notoriously, a scatterbrain and hard to remember things. We do have a page here talking about the GRE exam. Check and see if it is required. Some places are not accepting it at all. Some places are requiring it, and some places are making it optional. You can prepare, you can take practice tests. You can retake the exam, but previous scores will still appear on your application. There is a wide range of how much people value or discount the GRE scores across people inside of a single institution, across multiple institutions. Your mileage may vary wildly here. This is something that is probably not going to be consistent across institutions that you're applying to. Okay, so I have two kind of parts of this talk that I want to talk about. There is a question here I think is really good that just came in. What are ways for an undergraduate student to make sure they are building a strong relationship with their professor? Generally, anything that goes beyond like in-class experiences can be really good. So being a TA, participating in a research project, maybe even taking a class project and going to the professor and saying, I'd like to have this have a research component, and maybe kind of going above and beyond kind of what the minimal thing is. These are all kind of some ways to build a relationship. Just go talk to them. Lots of professors have office hours, and you can just go talk to them and explain that you want to go to grad school and ask them what can they, how can you help them get to know you better? And many professors would be very happy to help out students in that situation. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little about the admissions process. This is a process that is complicated and complex, and sometimes can be quite opaque. So don't think of this so much as mapping into your junior year and senior year, but think of this as like a 2-year timeline, right? And so wherever you are, if you're a junior, you could apply if you want to transition directly from, graduating from your undergrad to going into a PhD program. I think there's a lot of value in doing a PhD later on in life and having worked for at least a year or two. This is quite common for people to take a year or two off, work for a little bit, and then come back. I'm in software engineering is my area, and PhDs in software engineering, having had at least a year of experience working, can really help you understand kind of what the industry is like, which can be very helpful when doing software engineering research. So maybe if you think about this as often can be up to a 2-year process, right? So you're taking CS courses, you're preparing, maybe thinking about taking the GRE, maybe starting to do some research. Then you have to decide which schools to narrow down to, maybe think about who you're going to get letters of recommendations from. This could very well be professors, but it could also be, maybe other people if you've been working for a while, maybe some of your coworkers or something like that. Think about updating your resume, draft your personal statement, right? And then in the fall is when applications are due. So you'll be submitting an application, finalizing it, managing your letter writers. If they're faculty, you might have to email them 2 or 3 times to remind them, because sometimes faculty forget things, right? This is just kind of how the world works, right? And then usually in the fall, applications are submitted. In the spring, notifications go out. And then it's very common for people to get a campus visit. So if you get accepted to the program, then you'll get an acceptance letter. And then before you have to accept or reject, you'll get a chance to visit the campus and see what it's like. You may get accepted to 2 or 3 places, and you may go to 2 or 3 visits if you want to, and then you get to make a decision. So that's kind of a common admissions timeline. So what are some factors to consider where to apply to? So one thing, we'll mention this later, but often there is a monetary cost to applying. Now, sometimes this can get waived, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but this is not necessarily like something that is just, and again, if you're personalizing your statement, perhaps to a professor at each institution, right, there is a cost. Even if it's not monetary, there is kind of a time cost for you to personalize your materials and apply to each place. So you probably want to apply to a reasonable number of schools, a manageable number of schools. It's not in the, dozens and even more, right? So that can be, you're going to probably narrow it down and apply to a relatively select number of schools. So how do you consider which schools to apply to? So strong researchers in the area of interest is a great criteria, right? You are going to be learning how to do research, and you want to find researchers who do your area of interest. So generally the bigger names, CMU, Stanford, MIT, these types of schools often have lots of researchers in lots of areas. Generally, smaller schools maybe are not quite so broad, but they often have very strong researchers just in maybe a few areas. So I went to Oregon State for my PhD. We had great software engineering researchers, we had great ML researchers, but there wasn't a lot in databases, and there wasn't a lot in some other random thing that networks. There wasn't a lot of like networking or operating system researchers, right? So it's usually less a matter of quality and more a matter of breadth. So if you're looking to get into a school, thinking about where is there a school that has strong researchers in the areas that interest you is really important. Healthy student and academic culture is really, really important. PhDs can be very stressful. They can be there can be a lot of challenges. And unfortunately, not everywhere has a super healthy culture, both for students, for academics. Kind of thinking about what kind of work-life balance you want or you're looking for is a really important question, and seeing if you kind of mesh with what the culture is there. As we mentioned before, lots of PhDs will give you a stipend, right? It's not what you're going to make as a developer, but it's definitely more than, it's much better than you having to pay. Lots of times there are, there's health benefits. This kind of what that actually gets you varies wildly depending on if you're at, CMU in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, or if you're at Columbia in Manhattan, New York, right? Even if the stipends are relatively similar on paper, those go a lot, your money will go a lot farther in certain places than other places. So thinking about cost of living, stuff like that kind of goes into the financial support offered by the program. Location preferences, it's totally fine to have a geo filter, right? Maybe you have a partner, or maybe you have family, or maybe you have certain weathers patterns that you like or don't like. Maybe you really don't like snow. Maybe you really do love snow, right? All those things are valid choices, and you shouldn't consider, there's lots of universities all across the country, and there's lots of different types of areas and places where people live, and there's lots of locations, and you shouldn't feel like you have to necessarily commit to searching all over the whole country. It's totally legitimate to do a search only on the West Coast, or only on the East Coast, or only with some other kind of geo filter or range. Lastly, there are departmental rankings out there. I think most of us don't think these are the best way to think about it, just purely following the rankings. They can be a proxy for kind of the breadth of departments and maybe some other factors that do interest you, but I would generally strongly advise students against, coming up with 5 schools, ranking them by the U.S. News and World Reports, and applying it at those schools based solely on that criteria. Again, there is a cost to you to submit the applications, even if it's not monetary. So, maybe think about a couple schools that you think you might have a high chance of getting in, a couple schools that you think are a good chance of getting in, a couple schools that you think are maybe a low chance. There is a lot of unpredictability and non-determinism that comes into play here. And most of this has nothing to do with you. A lot of PhD funding, remember, you are getting paid to do a PhD, so someone is having to pay you. Generally, this is the professor. So generally, professors have funding for certain types of students. Maybe this year they're looking for someone who's particularly strong in math, and maybe next year they're looking for somebody who's particularly strong in human studies, or who has done something in robotics, or who knows something about, some other topic. And it's impossible to predict kind of what they're going to be looking for any given year. Oftentimes they don't know until right before the admissions happens. It could be that maybe they have another student that's ready to graduate, and if that student graduates, then they're going to bring in a new student. If that student doesn't graduate, they wait for a year and then bring in another student a year later, right? All of these have really nothing to do with you, or nothing that you can control, at least. So this is why, this is not at all a situation where students get ranked by some arbitrary ranking and then chosen from the top. It's why your personal statement is so important. And again, it's good to think about a few top schools, but also, maybe you'll be a better fit for them than some of the other schools. So you never really know. Your advisor, other faculty in your research areas could be really helpful. Some of this information is not easily accessible, or it's not obvious, like what schools have good researchers in which area, what areas or you can start to search the other way and say, well, I'm looking in the Pacific Northwest, what schools, what are the research areas that are strong locally? Those sorts of questions can be really tricky to figure out on your own. And talking to a faculty member can really help you, because a lot of this is kind of common knowledge in the community that, generally your faculty members can really help you out with and speed up that process. If you get accepted and there is a campus visit, this is a great thing to do. We would highly recommend it. There are, you're committing to kind of a long-term relationship, and you should almost think of this more like a job interview. And remember, when you're job interviewing, you're always interviewing the company as much as the company is interviewing you. And so thinking about, what are the potential advisors like? What are the potential PhD students like? What is their life like? What is their work-life balance like? Where's the campus? Is it rural? Is it in a big city? Is it in a small college town, right? How do you feel about that? What are you looking for out of a place to live, right? What is the institution like? What is the department like? All these sorts of things can be things that you can really learn a lot about on a visit that can be hard to kind of learn just by, the internet. It's nice to know your area of things that you're really interested in. It's not required at all. You don't have to commit to a specific area. It's totally reasonable to contact potential advisors and talk to them ahead of time. This is not like insider trading or something that the FCC is going to come, hunt you down because you talk to a professor at a school that you're applying to. And in fact, lots of times conversations like that can lead to you getting admitted if you actually can start a conversation. Generally, a cut and pasted email to the professor is not going to get them to reply, but maybe a thoughtful, personalized email will. If maybe there's if it's local and you can go visit them in person, or you can go to a conference and meet with them, or you can talk to a faculty member at your school who can set up a meet and greet with them in some way, a Zoom call or something. All these can be great ways to start a conversation. We've talked a little bit about finances already. Oftentimes you are getting stipends, but usually the fact that they're paying you means there's certain responsibilities that you have. Generally, this looks like either a research assistantship or a teaching assistantship. So you're either a TA helping do TA duties, or you're an RA, which is basically you're doing research for a specific advisor and they're funding you to do that. Generally, you try to do the RA for your advisor, so you're getting paid to do the research that helps your PhD and also helps advance your advisor. But maybe for a semester, they may ask you to do a TA-ship. This varies wildly by institutions and lots of factors. There also are fellowships that you can apply to. There are many fellowships. These can sometimes fund you. These can sometimes be just kind of a relatively small amount of money kind of on top of your already existing stipend. But, it can be a really nice thing to pursue. Whoops. I did not mean to pass that many slides. Okay, I think I am done with my part and I'm ready to hand it off to Ian. Do you want me to stop sharing or?
No, please continue sharing. My Zoom controls have completely shut down.
Okay.
But I can
see
the slides in my browser, so if you don't mind advancing. Yeah, so for context, everyone, I'm in my 5th year of the PhD program now, and before starting, I had about a half-year gap between undergrad and grad school, and I worked as a software engineer during that point. So my transition was almost directly from undergrad, but with a little bit of work experience in the middle there. If we could go to the next slide on. So before you start your official semester, you want to kind of get to know a little bit about the program that you've already learned some about during applying and visiting. But you need to, just get more familiar with kind of what some of the different requirements are. As Michael talked about, all departments have all sorts of different requirements and structures. And so you want to get an idea of kind of what's expected of you in the program. And it's really important to get to know not only the other grad students that are in your research group and research area, but then also just more broadly across the department. It's really helpful to, have friends in other research areas and share ideas, and then also friends outside of the computer science department completely that you can have other conversations with. And getting familiar with your overall college and university. There's a lot of different resources, like different funding sources, different workshops. I know I've benefited a lot from teaching workshops that our Center for Innovation and Teaching and Learning has put on, and then also some writing workshops. So there's a lot of different things out there to take advantage of. And then you really want to make sure that you have the environment that you need to be successful, which a lot of times looks like, making sure that you have the a good housing setup. And that's another factor to consider in the factors for choosing a place is, cost of living can be a big determining factor in what type of housing options you have. So for instance, here in Champaign-Urbana, not to try to plug Champaign-Urbana too much, but we have a really low cost of living because we're in the middle of nowhere essentially, as opposed to like the Bay Area is going to have much higher cost of living. So housing options here are a lot more comfortable, and just making sure that you're taking the time to continue balancing your work and relaxation, which we'll talk a bit more in more slides. On the next slide, you are going to take some courses, as we mentioned, and but these are not really the focus. And so you want to, as you're taking these courses, be thinking about these courses as somewhat a means to an end. Of you want to enjoy the what you're learning, but also some classes will have a very flexible kind of research-based component to them, where you can do a course project, and that's a great opportunity to explore working with a certain professor. If if you're taking their elective course that's kind of in their research area, you can explore something in that subfield and learn a lot more about it. And then that might be a good way to explore potentially doing future work in that field. And then it's also worth considering taking other classes. I know I'm in the theory and algorithms, kind of theoretical CS research area. And so I've definitely benefited from taking some courses in our math department. And I know some friends that do like natural language processing that have benefited from computational linguistics classes. So don't only look at your department's course offerings when thinking about what to take. And on the next slide, one of the most important things to keep in mind when you're making that transition into grad school is that research is definitely not the same thing as taking classes. And it can be really disorienting at the beginning, but then, there's times throughout where you can kind of experience this continued tension between, okay, I kind of knew what I was doing in undergrad. Now I'm a little bit like a fish out of water and have to work on figuring out how to ask the right questions, how to get unstuck. And so a lot of the challenge comes from not having kind of a known solution to a lot of the problems that you're working on. And you can ask people for help, but a lot of times they're not going to know any more than you do. And that can include your advisor at times. They might have, suggestions for other literature to read, other research papers, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to be working with them to kind of dig through what's there, see what creative ideas you can come up with for how to tackle problems. And so it's important to have an understanding of that distinction as you start that research apprenticeship. And on the next slide, part of part of the reason that you want to get involved in research early is so that you can start to get more comfortable with that process early on. And it takes, a fair amount of time to learn about, do a deep dive into an area that you're considering doing research in. So the sooner you get started, the better. And then also, big key to that is having a particular professor to work with as your advisor. And a lot of departments have different ways of kind of finding that advisor, as was talked about before. But some of the easiest ways are just going to them during their office hours and having a conversation. A lot of departments have independent studies where you can have course credits for doing a research project with them before you're officially their advisee. And then, as I mentioned before, taking an elective class where you can learn more about their research area and do a project that's related. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about work-life balance. The key here is, for me, I really liked this analogy that someone gave me one time of it's less about finding a balance that's kind of this fixed point that you stay at, and more about being in this continual act of balancing, where you've got all sorts of different forces pulling you in different directions, and you're kind of moving with things, but having to continue this process of actively balancing so that you're, making sure that you're fulfilling the different obligations that you have, but then also not getting burnt out. And it's important to make sure that you have a good support network of friends and family, if you're close with family, to make that happen. And there's some other ideas on this slide about how to make that happen for you. But at the end of the day, be aware that a lot of grad students do experience mental health problems. And so it's okay to, seek help. And even outside of mental health issues, it's important to make sure that your relationships with, especially your advisor, since they're so critical to your success in the program, is healthy, and that you're setting yourself up for smooth success. And that's all I have. Thank you.
You're muted, Janet.
Sorry. So I'm going to be concluding this talk talking a bit about the research apprenticeship and then what happens beyond the PhD. Choosing an advisor is one of the most important decisions you'll make in graduate school, possibly the most important decision you'll make in graduate school. I changed advisors while I was in grad school, and it's definitely a possible thing to do. It can be a very difficult transition, though. I actually, speaking of mental health, saw a counselor for a little while in graduate school. Towards the end, I probably should have seen a counselor while I was switching advisors. That would have been helpful. When you are considering possible advisors, of course you care what research problems they're working on. You want to seek out an advisor who is doing research that you're interested in. But beyond that, you want to find out something about what your potential advisor's track record is like, and what are they like to work with? How many students have they supervised? When did they graduate? If a potential advisor has not graduated very many graduate students, or they've taken a long time to graduate, that might be suggest they're not as experienced an advisor, or maybe not as good an advisor. How many papers and where have students published with their advisor? Publishing during grad school is really important. You publish your research alongside completing your PhD, your dissertation, and a good advisor should be encouraging their students to publish. Where are those students now in academia or industry? And where do you want to be? Are that professors, students going to where you want to be? You can also talk to their current PhD students to find out things like, what is the advisor's collaboration style? Do they like to work closely, have a lot of one-on-one meetings? Are they very scheduled? Is it easy to just drop into their office and have a conversation? And is the advisor an established or a beginning researcher? There are trade-offs either way. An established researcher may have a strong reputation and a lot of experience that will help you get a leg up. They may also be really busy and it may be hard to get their time. By contrast, a beginning researcher is going to be very invested in your work and may have a lot of time and energy to invest in you, but they're also less experienced, don't necessarily have that proven track record or reputation. To get to know faculty, talk to them during their office hours, take classes with them, attend their research talks, find out if you're interested in their research. If this is someone you think you would enjoy talking with. And you can also ask to attend research meetings of a group that you're interested in. I found this very helpful when I was switching advisors as a graduate student, to attend research meetings, kind of find out how the research meetings are run, what kinds of things people talk about, what the culture of the research group is, and whether that's a good fit for your working style and personality, as well as the problems that you're interested in. What are advisors looking for? Generally, advisors are looking for competency and interest in their area of research. So taking a course and doing well in it can be really important. Having an interest in doing research or a specific problem in that area can be really important. Advisors may also look for specific technical or research skills. For example, experience building large software system or ability to write proofs is really important in theoretical computer science. And of course, writing and critical thinking skills are really important to research overall. And when we share these slides with you, you'll have access to these links to additional resources on finding an advisor. Tips for conducting a successful research project. We did not make this slide. We inherited this slide. There are a lot of different ways of conducting a successful research project. This is a very linear approach. Identify a problem you're passionate about, just devise a new solution or experiment, create a plan for the work and stick to it, and rigorously evaluate or explain your findings. In fact, many of us find that research is a much more organic process where sometimes it's only partway into a project we discover the question we really should have been asking all along. So there's really not one right way to do research. Part of what you'll be looking for in an advisor is someone who can serve as your mentor and guide as you learn your way of doing research. Beyond the PhD, we're going to address this very briefly. There are many different career paths beyond the PhD. Tenure track professor at a research university is the path that your advisor will have experience with as a tenured professor as a research university. But it's important to remember that that's not the only path. Another path is to become a teaching focused professor at a research university. Michael can speak more to that path. I'm a professor at a primarily undergraduate institution where mostly I focus on teaching, but during breaks and in the summer, I get to do research. If you're excited to do research all of the time, becoming an industry or government researcher could be an option. And finally, a PhD can be an opportunity to be an entrepreneur or to take a leadership role in cutting edge software development projects. So there are many possible paths from the PhD. Not only becoming a tenure track professor at a research university. In summary, why should you pursue a PhD in computer science? to develop research skills, to advance the state of the art, to create new knowledge in computer science. And researchers in computer science enjoy a tremendous amount of autonomy. So the opportunity to choose what problems you're going to work on, and make discoveries that interest you, and not necessarily just what a company would pay you to do. So with that, I think we'll be wrapping up. There is a little bit of time for further Q&A. If you want more information, you can check out the Conquer website, conquer.cra.org. Many departments and universities also have grad school information sessions, so consider attending those information sessions for programs you might consider applying to. And last, a pitch for the Education Committee of the CRA. CRAE's mission is to address society's need for a continuous supply of talented and well-educated computing researchers. And you and our audience may be future computing researchers. So thank you for your time, and I think we'd be happy to answer any further questions. Let's see, so I'll invite my co-presenters to jump on and help me answer questions here. We have a current question. Are there any questions that we want to go back to that have already been answered?
I'll talk a little bit about the bachelor's thesis while you're looking over the questions that have come in. In general, I don't think a bachelor's thesis is going to make or break it, but it can be a great opportunity for you to practice your writing skills and the type of skills that are very helpful in doing research. So if some schools don't have an opportunity to be a bachelor's thesis, and that's okay if you don't have an opportunity, but if you do have the opportunity to do it, this can really give you a lot of research is actually the presentation, the writing up of the results, presenting the results, and kind of this process. And this can be a really useful kind of learning experience for you. So I would say go for it if you have the option, but if you don't stress about it too much.
Something you always have the option to do is to pursue summer research projects. Two important programs are the National Science Foundation's research experiences for undergraduates. Another is the CRA's distributed research experience program, and both of those can provide funding for undergraduates to do summer research at other universities.
Ian, do you want to talk about computer science PhD as a math major? Since you're in theory, this seems like your wheelhouse. Sorry, we can't hear you. Are you on mute?
Can you please read the question? I have no access to the Q&A.
Any input on pursuing computer science PhD as a math major?
Oh, yeah. So my major in undergrad was a double major in computer engineering and math. And I realized as I got towards the end of that I did not like the hardware side and the low-level programming, but really liked the math that was in CS, the discrete math and algorithms. And so there were, some gaps. I didn't have a compilers course at all, things like that. But so far in a theory and algorithms research area, having that math background has been really helpful. Just having a strong discrete math and linear algebra. If you're going to do theoretical CS work, those are super important. But it's definitely reasonable to cross over from math into CS and vice versa for grad school.
There's another question that says, how did you spend summers when pursuing a PhD? Was it mostly research internships? So this varies wildly by person, by relationship with your advisor, by what your goals are. I did one summer internship with Microsoft Research, and the rest I just worked doing research over the summers. But I was a little bit older and I kind of knew what I wanted, and I wasn't kind of exploring career paths as much as I was just trying to get my PhD done. And other people who maybe are a little bit younger and don't have quite as much experience are oftentimes use their PhDs to kind of explore different types of options out there and see what they like in there. I'll kick it over to other people to comment on that as well.
My path was pretty similar. Summers aren't as special when you're a grad student as they are as an undergrad. Summer was really time to double down and focus on my research. because I wasn't taking or teaching any courses. I did do one summer internship at Intel Research Lab, but I actually got that internship because of the research project I was already involved in.
And I want to
For
kind of
me-
piggyback. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ian, and then I'll say something.
Yeah, for me so far, it's been just staying on campus working on research. And there was one summer where, summer 2020, I had asked the department the prior year. I'd been a TA several times. And since I'm hoping to have a teaching focused faculty career, had asked the department if I could be the instructor of record for a class and teach it all on my own in the summer. And so I did that for like a 50-person class, an 8-week course in the summer. So that was a good way to kind of explore my desired career path.
And I just want to point out that there was a question here earlier that said, any advice for someone who wants to teach at a college level but not necessarily interested in research? This was my, I mean, I was interested in research, but I really wanted to teach at the college level. So I knew I needed a PhD for that. So I was kind of focused on that from day one. And so my PhD looks a little bit different than other people's PhD who are maybe more focused on doing other things with it. Like Janet mentioned, all the kind of the options that people can do with it. So a lot of this kind of depends on what you want to get out of it too, in terms of how many internships you have and where you go and stuff like that. Someone asked, and I think this is a question for Ian, but since you can't read it, I'll read it out loud. Can you elaborate on how a mathematics degree benefits a student interested in pursuing a CS PhD?
Sure. So in a lot of the courses I've taken, like I took it was an advanced undergrad machine learning course just to kind of get a little bit of breadth. There was a ton of linear algebra throughout that. In the combinatorics and discrete math courses, there's advanced algorithms courses, there's a lot of probability and different advanced discrete math topics that come up a lot. And those are classes that, and theory of computation, if you're studying computational complexity, you need to be familiar with different models of computation and automata and how to analyze those. So all of those courses, some of those, can pop up in CS departments or math departments, depending on your institution. But those are some of the courses that, from my math background, really helped lay a strong foundation for doing graduate work in CS.
If you stayed on campus over the summer, what was the financial situation? What I'm recollecting is that when I had I had an NSF graduate fellowship, and that continued over the summer as well as during the academic year. And when I had research assistantships, my advisor was willing to continue my assistantship over the summer. So I received the same stipend for the summer quarter that I did for the other quarters of the academic year.
I think it's important to kind of point out that I'm going to question the assumptions a little bit of this question. And I think it kind of feels like the assumption is that being a PhD student looks very similar to being an undergraduate student. And I think that you should not think that at all, that being a PhD student is much more like being an employee of a professor at the university. So think of like, if you're working in a job, what was the summer financial situation be like? Well, it's pretty much like the rest of the year. You do work and you get paid, and you're probably living off campus. It's much more like a job than like being a student where you're in the dorms and you have all these breaks. And so it's the pace of life is much more like a job than the pace of life is like being a student, where you have discrete semesters and you're looking to, make it through finals. And then you have summer break or winter break or what have you.
Yeah. But I will say the summers can be a little bit less certain financially if depending on your advisor's research funding. So it's important to communicate with your advisor well in advance of the summer and get a sense of, okay, what's summer funding going to look like? What are the options? And some advisors will, at certain points throughout your PhD, encourage you to, based on your careers that you're considering, encourage you to pursue an internship. But then there's a lot of times summers are a great time to focus in on making good progress on research. So for me, I was a TA every semester for the first couple of years. And because my advisor was not using research assistantship money for me, he was able to have funding for me in the summers that was a little bit less than the teaching assistant stipend, but was like 2 months worth of the TA stipends equivalent spread across those 3 months in the summer. And so knowing that well in advance allowed me to kind of plan for that. But it is important to just have those conversations and you know be smart about your money and budget and plan things out accordingly.
The other thing I'll point out is that most of the time, if you're doing an internship with a company, they will pay you because they want to own the intellectual property that you produce over that summer. And so this motivates them to pay you. And often they will pay significantly higher than what your stipend is. And so it oftentimes the research is it's not, you may not spend 100% of your time doing your research, but you will probably make more money. And so if you're in a situation where, the extra finances are helpful for you, you might want to consider more summer internships as a way to kind of support you or your family or what have you as well. There might be some benefits to the financial benefits to summer internships.
Okay, that was the last open question we had in Q&A. I think one last call for questions and then we'll wrap up for today. Any parting thoughts?
There's one last question rolled in right here at the last second. How beneficial is a PhD for jobs in industry? I think it'd be very beneficial. I think the skills you learn doing a PhD can be incredibly useful. I don't think it's necessarily going to earn you a significantly more amount of money. Janet said this earlier, and I totally agree with her, especially if you consider the opportunity cost of 6 years of not getting paid a software developer salary. But I think it can help you grow immensely as a person. I think you can help you learn how to tackle hard problems. I think you can learn how to be creative. You can do things that you like. So I think there's huge benefits for it. And these benefits don't go away if you go take a job at Google, right? So I think it's beneficial, not necessarily in a financial sense always, but just as a chance for you to learn and develop and grow as a human and as a person and as a computer scientist. I think there could be huge benefits.
And if you do want to do research in an industry environment where you're working with more applied problems, then a lot of times a PhD is almost essential for doing that.
If you want to work in an industry research lab or a government research lab, a PhD is your license to do research. So a PhD is not quite, but almost required.
Can you have another job in the summer, a job not related to your research? It depends on the program, but it's going to be really hard to do research to make progress on 6 years of research is pretty much a full-time 6 years of research. So if you start taking summers off to do a job, then you start becoming a part-time student, and as 6 years starts to grow pretty significantly. This isn't to say it can't happen, and sometimes there's real pressures financially or otherwise that people have to contend with part of life, but just know that this is going to increase that 6-year number to be probably a much larger number than 6 if you start taking summers off.
Going back to Ian's point, if you're planning to take summers off, essentially off from graduate school, that would be a conversation between you and your advisor, because it does slow your project and may also not just slow your progress, but interrupt the work that you're doing. So I might again come back to Michael's point that pursuing a PhD is more like having a job than it is like being an undergraduate student.
It would be weird to go to your job and be like, hey, I'm taking summer off to work at another job, and then I'll be back to work for you for the fall, right? That just is a little, that conversation could be a bit awkward. I'm about to graduate with a CS master's degree, but no research experience. I'm hoping to go into industry for a few years and then into a PhD to become a professor one day. How can I get research experience in the next few years? Thanks.
That's a great question.
So I would say that you can probably, so there's lots of ways to answer this question, right? Wherever you live, there's probably going to be a university close by, and there's probably professors there that if you walked out, if you went, you set up a time to meet them and said, I'm interested in doing some part-time research with the goal of getting into a PhD program someday, would probably be pretty open to that. I have done projects like this myself. The expectations are just different than working with a current student, but this can still be a great way to meet people. You may go to industry conferences where maybe there are professors who come to your conference in your area. If you're working in a specific area, maybe there's a conference and maybe there's academics at that conference as well as practitioners. This can be a great way to meet people who are doing things similar to the things you're working in. Oftentimes there can be synergy between the work you're getting paid for in industry and the research that professors want to do, especially in software engineering, which I'm in. Almost all of our research involves somehow interfacing with or talking to or observing a actual practitioner. And so there are lots of there's a lot more people who want to do research than there are people with access to industry professionals. So you would bring a valuable asset to the table with real life experience and data and stuff to a researcher. So there are definitely opportunities to follow that. It's not, there's not as marked out of a pathway forward. It's going to be a little bit more kind of case by case basis than perhaps kind of as a student, where there's kind of some more, well-established options such as the REU program that Janet mentioned earlier. But it's still definitely still on the table and very much a real option.
And depending on the area that you're interested in, you can also during that time be, still keeping up with what's going on in that area research-wise through a lot of conferences will have their proceedings publicly available, so you can kind of read through the research papers that are getting published at those conferences. And if depending on who you're reaching out to, sometimes people are very willing to talk more about their research if you reach out, or you can go to websites of academics that you see publishing in certain areas and learn more about their work that way.
Join the ACM and use the ACM digital library to read the literature on current research problems that you're interested in.
There's another question here. If I have a research experience during undergrad, how long can I wait until this experience is irrelevant in the case of going into industry and then back into research? I mean, honestly, it's very unlikely that you're going to do the exact same project that you did as an undergrad as a PhD student, even if you go directly from undergrad straight into a PhD program. So really, it's more about the meta skills of breaking down a problem. How do you think about the solution? How do you make sure someone hasn't solved this problem before? How do you present this research? Like those sorts of skills. And those, I mean, I think eventually they probably, if you haven't done research in 50 years, is probably going to raise some eyebrows, but this is not something that immediately expires, right? This sort of knowledge. So I would not be super worried that there's a ticking time bomb on your knowledge and it's all going to go away within, a year or 2 years. If anything, you can think about the skills that helped you be successful while doing research and build on those skills while you're working at your job and improve on them and be in a better position when you go back to get a PhD. Unless anyone wants to comment on that, there's another question I'll read. How can an undergrad make their research opportunities as effective as possible? This is a fantastic question. And I wish that there was some magic bullet that I could tell you that was like the great solution. Maybe I'll let Janet take this one because, and then it was to give me some time to think, but
boy, yeah, this is something where I had a magic bullet. Research experiences are so variable. The thing about research is that you're trying to create new knowledge and you don't know you don't always know at the beginning when you frame the question, you don't know what the answer is going to be. If you knew, it wouldn't be research. If I had to say something, what I would say probably is to try to be reflective and to articulate what you are learning. Journaling or blogging actually can be really helpful for you to understand what you are gaining from a research experience. I would also say treat it like a job and be fully present and committed. When you're working on the research project, you are working on the research project, and you are there to collaborate with your professor and your lab mates, and you're trying to actively contribute and not just being carried along, even though they're quite a bit senior to you. Ask questions.
I think that's a great answer, and I'm glad I kicked it over to you. I would just add one thing, which is, in addition to doing research, you're trying to become a researcher, and this involves getting involved in the community of researchers. And so don't discount the value of making connections, learning from people, like reach out, like even if you're doing research with a specific professor, like pursue opportunities to have conversations with other professors at the same institution, even if they're doing something that's not exactly what you're doing, or with PhD students, and find out what their life is like learn about the material. Everything Janet said is great, but also at a meta level, learn about the institution, learn about the community, learn about this area, and make decisions about whether this is the area for you, this is the community for you, is this the institution for you? So there's kind of at a meta level, thinking about the community and stuff, I think is helpful as well.
Yeah, learn about how other people do research, because different people do research in different ways.
And there's not only one right way.
Our Concord website also has a lot of resources if you want to get a lot more opinions on how to make the most of your undergrad research experience. If you go to concord.cra.org, on the resources and for undergraduates page, there's a sort of an FAQ structure, and there's a whole bunch of different from different faculty, their take on how to build different research skills, whether that's creating a poster, giving technical talks, those sorts of things.
There's another question here. How does being a TA balance with being a researcher? If I'm a TA, does this mean I do less research? Yes.
Yes.
But it also means you're getting paid, right? So you're balancing, probably like support for your position with, doing research. There is a subfield in which this is not quite as true, and that is if you are a CS education researcher. In that case, you may very well be a TA and you may be doing your research on CS education at the same time. But that's generally an exception that's only true in the CS research subfield. For most people, being a TA does not support their research in a direct way, but, is just part of what being an academic is about.
Yeah, I guess I'll add a few more thoughts. One is that you put some boundaries on being a teaching assistant. You kind of put a box around how much time you spend being a teaching assistant, so that you have enough time to finish your own coursework and develop your own research. A typical path through a PhD program, you might be more likely to have a teaching assistant position near the beginning of your PhD program, when you haven't yet found an advisor, haven't yet proposed your dissertation, aren't too deep into it yet. And then as you have an advisor and are deeper into your dissertation, you might be more likely to have a research assistantship rather than a teaching assistantship. Caveat: if you are excited to pursue a teaching-oriented career path, as I think Ian, Michael, and I all are, then you may continue to serve as a teaching assistant throughout the years of graduate school, because teaching is something you're passionate about. You might teach your own class as the instructor of record, like Ian did and like I did. And I can say I did not make very much progress on my dissertation the quarter that I was an instructor of record during graduate school. But that experience was really valuable to me in learning how to teach, building a teaching portfolio, and helping me confirm that I wanted a teaching-oriented career path. I also had experiences as a graduate TA where my advisor wanted me to serve as their teaching assistant for their graduate level course. And that can be more like a research experience as well. You're at least getting to learn about the current research those students are discussing and their research projects as part of the course.
I agree with all that. I also taught as an instructor of record as a graduate student, and it was transformational for me personally. One thing is, as we've said multiple times, a PhD is a license to do research. This does not mean you get taught how to teach. And then many people take a PhD and go get an academic job where they get handed the keys to a classroom full of students and people say, good luck, have fun. And you have had basically no experience or no advice on how to teach. So having some TA experiences and learning how to teach, or learning even just seeing up close how the sausage is made when it comes to a class can really be helpful. Especially if you're thinking about going into an academic position or a teaching focused position.
We currently have no open questions, and it's now 5:20. So I think this is probably a good time to wrap up. Thank you for all of the wonderful questions. I hope this was informative for you. I want to remind you of these resources at conquer.cra.org. And I also want to remind you that your professors, whether you're a current student or a past student, will often be very happy to talk with you about pursuing a PhD in computer science. So don't take our word for it. Talk to your people too.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming. It was great chatting with you all.
Yep.
Bye.
Best wishes, everyone.